up troops, welcome back to the Litanah army, I'm Lit, and today we're tackling what I think is a hot topic, which is why do early access games always seem to struggle? Now, with so many early access titles out there and launching recently, it's become a common story. The hype builds up, the game launches unfinished, and then things tend to go sideways. But today we're going to dig into the reasons behind this, we're going to explore whether we're too harsh on developers, and also ask the big question: can an early access game redeem itself after it's had a bit of a shaky launch, or is failure permanent? So we're even going to look at some of these redemption stories like No Man's Sky and Wayfinder, and we're going to finish with what we should really expect from games. So let's jump in and see what everybody thinks about this. So before we get down into why early access games struggle, let me tell you what sparked this discussion. We were looking at Towers of Aghasba that launched recently, and it wasn't that well received, and not as well received as I thought it should have been. Now, the game's got some great ideas, it's got a lush open world, it's got a community-driven mechanics. It's been let down by a long list of issues though. So you've got the forced Epic Games sign-in for multiplayer, which was not disclosed before launch, or I certainly didn't see it anywhere. I've looked in the comments, you've got frequent crashes. You've also got unpolished animations, so like trees awkwardly falling when you cut them down. You've got high GPU usage, at the minute poor optimization. You've got a camera that feels too zoomed in, you've got broken cutscenes, you've got clunky mechanics, you've got a poor tutorial system, the navigation system on how to get around is a bit of a nightmare, and then worst of all, quests are a total mess, so tracking them is just frustrating, and at times I found it was confusing. But with all that said, these issues don't take away from all the good what the game had to offer. It's clear that Towers of Aghasba is far from polished, and I didn't expect it to be, but because of this, it's been absolutely slated in the reviews. Now, this is where the real danger lies, well, I feel it lies, because this isn't a wealthy development team. They're a decent sized development team, but they're not full of money, and early access is their chance to generate some money, and they can use then to improve the game. But at what cost? Will the negative reviews damage their reputation so badly that it scares away future players? Like, I feel that sometimes happens a little bit in Wayfinder, or worse, will it doom the game entirely? And that's what's made me dive into this topic today. So why do some early access titles face an uphill battle, and what can we actually learn from this launch on this time around? So first off then, let's talk about why early access games often struggle so often. So the promise of early access is really simple. The devs release what is a work in progress, we support them financially, and then they use that support and that money to finish the game. So that sounds good, right? But there is a catch. What you tend to get with that is unrealistic expectations, so players often expect a polished experience even in early access games, and it might be labelled as unfinished, but people still want it to feel really fun, and they want it functional all from day one. What you also get as well, what early access games suffer from, and I think Tales of Aghasba suffered from this, is overhype. So trailers and marketing sometimes almost oversell what the game actually is, and it leads to disappointment. So Towers of Aghasba was a prime example. It looked incredible in the previews, but it didn't deliver what we saw on the trailers at launch. And is that a bad thing? They did say it was early access. So what you're seeing in the trailers is what the dev team are hoping the finished product is going to look like. What you also sometimes get as well is a lack of resources. So many early access games come from little indie teams, and they've got small budgets. So if sales flop early, then they can't afford to keep improving the game. So a bad launch can really mean doom for some of these developers. Early access becomes almost a balancing act between showing enough potential to keep players engaged and playing, while surviving criticism of it being incomplete. So that brings us to our next question then. Are we as players too harsh on developers? I mean, even as creators especially, we're probably the worst ones for it, because if we put something out saying that a game's bad, it can absolutely doom a game as well. Now, on one hand, players are spending their hard-earned money, and they deserve a game that works. I absolutely agree with that. But on the other hand, early access is supposed to be about helping devs improve through feedback. Now, the problem is that negativity often drowns out the constructive criticism. So Steam reviews, Reddit threads, YouTube content, it can often be really, really brutal, which sometimes forces dev teams to almost abandon their games altogether. Now, imagine pouring years of work into a project only to see it torn apart online. So it's no surprise that some devs decide it's not worth the stress or financial strain to continue development of it. And an example, and A game that could be in danger of this, again, I know we've mentioned it earlier on, is Towers of Aghasba. That launched with poor reviews due to bugs and lack of meaningful content, and instead of feedback encouraging improvement, the response was overwhelmingly negative, which we saw at first. Now that has shifted to mixed, but that could make it harder for the team to push forward. So are we too harsh? I mean, maybe, but at the same time, developers need to be upfront about what players are going to get to avoid this kind of backlash. I think a good thing going forward would be to give a game sometimes an upvote if you see it's got potential, but then add the criticism in there. And also platforms like Reddit. I know a lot of indie developers tend to use Reddit or even their Discord little Discord forums in order to get feedback from the community. Games like Wayfinder have really put a lot of time and effort into actually changing the entire mechanics. They did a complete overhaul of the game in order to give players what they want, and I think that deserves some credit as well. One genuine question that I've got is, I always wonder if people return to games after they've refunded it. So here's the harsh reality of early access. If a player refunds your game, it's unlikely, I think, that they'll ever come back. And refund policies, especially from platforms like Steam, give players the power to try a game absolutely risk-free, but if the first impression is bad, whether it's bugs, lack of content, performance issues, they hit that refund button and they just move on. And it's really easy to do that now. So the question is, can a game recover from that? Let me know in the comments what you think of that. I tend to think that once a player moves on, it's hard for them to regain trust and interest in a game. You almost feel like you've played it already and your time in that game's kind of done. Even if devs fix everything later on, the damage is already there, it's already in place, and the reputation is already tarnished. So negative reviews tend to linger, and many potential players will skip the game altogether just because of that early reputation. Now let's look at the other side of the coin. Let's look at redemption stories, and two standout examples that I've mentioned already are No Man's Sky and Wayfinder. So let's start with No Man's Sky. This game launched in 2016 to massive disappointment. It was missing features, it had repetitive gameplay, it had broken promises that just made it the poster child for all overhyped failures going forward. But what I feel set Hello Games apart is how they handled it. Instead of abandoning ship, they actually doubled down. Over the years, and yeah, I say years, they released some incredible updates, even recently. And they've added multiplayer, they've added base building, they've got planetary overhauls, they've got VR support, beautiful graphic overhauls, and a lot more as well. And what's impressive is that all these updates were free. So to rebuild the game and their reputation amidst all that negative press, after becoming what was essentially a laughingstock, it's all actually an incredible achievement, what Sean Murray and the guys actually achieved in that time. So No Man's Sky went from a big cautionary tale to being a gold standard redemption tale in gaming. And Wayfinder, not as dramatic, had its own struggles during early access, with server issues, limited content, and all the other things that went with it. But the devs stayed transparent, they consistently delivered updates, they turned things around, and it's a reminder that often open communication and steady improvements and developing, communication with the devs, be that through Reddit, be that through YouTube, be that however you want to get to them, is absolutely invaluable for these indie developers releasing these early access games. So what should we really expect from early access then? Well, here's an idea. I mean, what if every early access game was required to include a roadmap? Not necessarily, with hard deadlines in it, but something that players can follow to understand the vision of the game. Games like Wartales, for example, the dev teams released a roadmap for that, outlining planned features, improvements, updates, and although it didn't promise exact dates, it gave players confidence that, the devs had a clear plan and they were actually going to work on the game. So a lot of the things that were missing from the game when it came into early access were actually written down, and we could go back and look and think, oh, that's fine, they're going to add that in later on. Now, not all issues can be predicted. Some bugs can appear on a large scale playtesting, so once the game's gone out in early access, all of a sudden certain bugs appear. But transparency does go a long way. If devs openly share their vision, it builds trust and encourages players to stick around for the entire journey. And I think that should be the benchmark. A clear, transparent vision for the game, playable and engaging call loop from day one. You've got to have that in your game. It's got to be playable and at least have the core mechanics down. And then regular communication and updates. And that's from both sides. That's from the player base and from the dev team themselves. That's not asking too much, right? So let's finish with a fantastic success story. Subnautica. I don't want this video to be all doom and gloom. So when Subnautica entered early access, it wasn't perfect. It lacked polish and not all the features were in place. But what it did have was a clear vision and a fun playable call loop. And that was really from day one. Exploring the ocean depths, crafting, survival all felt engaging, and even in the early days, it was all looking really good. The devs were regularly updating the player base about the game, they listened to feedback, and they built trust with their audience. By the time Subnautica officially launched, it was an absolute masterpiece and one of the highest rated survival games that's ever been made. And that is proof that early access can work when developers and players work together. So let's ask the big question then. So why do early access games struggle? That's what we're trying to get at here. Well, it's a mix of unrealistic expectations, communication issues, and just the pressures of a game development. Game development is not easy. But there's another side of the story, and that's us, the players. As consumers, we're shaping up how early access is being used. We keep demanding perfection from day one, and devs may stop using early access altogether, and I would hate that. Instead, they might return to releasing short demos as a safer option. So just giving you, like Assassin's Creed often did and Ubisoft did, where they just let you play up to a certain point in the story and keep the rest of the game behind a wall until it's ready for full release. But is that what we really want? I mean, demos don't offer the same opportunity to shape a game's development. Early access, at its best, is a collaborative process and a partnership between the devs and us, the player base. So if we lose that, we risk taking a step backwards in game development, I think, and just how games are developed in general. So maybe we need to adjust our expectations a little bit, meet the developers halfway. I mean, what do you think? Are we too hard on early access games, or do devs need to actually just step up and release something that's not just a buggy, unfinished mess? Let me know in the comments down below, because I know some of you have commented on previous videos and you've got quite strong opinions on that, and I loved reading them, which is what sparked this video. I want to get into the conversation of that, and I want to hear what you guys have got to say. So guys, look, don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more gaming insights and discussions. I know this is a little bit different to what we often do on the channel, but look, massive thanks for watching. I can't wait to read the comments on this one. Even if it's only got a few views and we get a big discussion in the comments, I'm going to love that. So I will see you guys on the next one. Thanks for watching, guys.